Okay, I'm gonna start because on somebody's clock it's 9:30, I'm sure. Welcome, everyone. This is a public meeting to consider the proposed comprehensive official plan and zoning bylaw amendments listed as items 2, 3, 4, and 5 on today's agenda. For the items just mentioned, only those who make oral submissions today or written submissions before the amendments are adopted may appeal the matter to the local planning appeal tribunal. In addition, the applicant may appeal the matter to the local planning appeal tribunal if council does not adopt an amendment within 90 days of receipt of the complete application for zoning and 120 days for an official plan amendment. To submit written comments on these amendments prior to their consideration by City Council on March the 10th, please email or call Ms. Duffany, who is the committee coordinator. And if anyone has any motions that we haven't seen so far that you know that you're going to be moving, please provide them to Ms. Duffany so that we can all have a look at it, as well as the delegations and the applicants. Any declarations of interest? Seeing none. Confirmation of minutes. Minutes 4, which are from the special joint meeting of Planning Committee and Agriculture and Rural Affairs Committee, January 25th, 26th, 2021. Are those carried?
Carried.
And then minutes 1 from the special joint meeting of Planning Committee and Build Heritage Subcommittee, February 5th, 2021. Are those carried?
Carried.
Thank you.
Carried.
And then there's minutes 36, special meeting of Planning Committee, February 5th, 2021. Is that carried?
Carried.
Thank you. And then finally, the minutes 37 from February 11th, 2021. Carried?
Carried.
Carried.
Thank you. So let's see if we can carry any of the items on the agenda. The first one is a deferral that was on the last agenda, development charge complaint, 500 Preston Street. Does anyone have any questions on this?
We do have the
Council-
delegations.
Oh. Sorry, I didn't notice that. All right, so we'll hold that. Item number 2 is 1770 Hetherington Road. We're going to have a presentation on that. Item number 3, we're having a presentation and we have speakers. This is official plan amendment, Corso Italia Station District, Corso Italia District, Station District, secondary plan, zoning bylaw amendments, etc. And so we're holding that item. 7 speakers on that. Item number 4 is 225 Pope Drive, zoning bylaw amendment in Canada South in Councillor Hughley's ward. We have 2 people here to speak. Does anyone have any questions on this item? So Mr. Deneme and Greg Winters are here. Do either of you need to speak if we're prepared to carry this item?
No, Madam Chair.
Oh, thanks.
Thank you. So is this item carried?
Carried.
Carried, thank you. Next up is in Kitchissippi Ward, zoning bylaw amendment, 991 Carling Avenue. We have speakers. Next up is the 2020 annual report pursuant to the Building Code Act. I have no delegations. Does anyone have any questions on this one? Seeing none, is that received?
Chair, on 991 Carling Avenue, I think the speakers are just the applicants, right, Melody?
That's correct.
Okay, so I'll go back. Well, can we receive number 6 and then I'll go back to number 5? Received. Thank you. Okay, so back to number 5. Yes, I see speaking if needed. Does anyone have any questions on this zoning bylaw amendment at 991 Carling Avenue in Councillor Leaper's ward? None? So to all of the people that are here, in case we need to ask questions, do any of you need to speak if we're prepared to carry this item?
No, Madam Chair.
Well, Christine, thank you very much. You're speaking on behalf of everyone. So on this item, is it carried?
Carried.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And then item number 7 is the status update. Planning Committee inquiries, motions for the period ending February 5th, 2021. Is that received, or does anyone have a question?
Received.
Received. Thanks very much. So we'll go back to the beginning, and the first item up is this for, I'll ask Mr. Smith. This is the development charge complaint at 500 Preston Street. As I said, it's deferred from the last Planning Committee meeting. Mr. Smith, are you here for questions, or are you making another presentation? And it's Philip Osterhout, Martin Chenier, and John Smith.
So I'm just make a few comments, Madam Chair, in advance. So clearly this was considered, as you indicated, at the last Planning Committee meeting. It was deferred. We appreciate the deferral. It did give us an opportunity to, in fact, reach out to Planning Committee members and further provide some further context to the development charge complaint. The one thing that we didn't mention at the last Planning Committee, which I think is an important piece of information, is that this is an affordable housing project that's being advanced under a CMHC program. So in that context, there was always a high degree of awareness of the importance of controlling the costs. And with the additional chronology that we had provided in a subsequent letter after the last Planning Committee, we provided a much more fulsome contextual framing of the back and forth discussions that were ongoing as the building permit was going through its review process. And we were at the very end of that review process, where the sense was that everything was pretty well adequately addressed from a technical point of view. And that's what caused the request for the permit to be issued prior to April 1st, again, knowing that the DCs would increase. So, and again, as we indicated at the last Planning Committee meeting, there was an email that indicated that the costs would be frozen in terms of DCs until October. And it was on that basis that the urgency to pick up a permit, even though a conditional permit was offered by staff, was not acted on. And hence we got to October 4th and the realization that in fact a significant increase in DCs was being applied. So from our position, Madam Chair, and I think as we discussed with the various council members that we had discussions with, we think that the case is there for the DC complaint to be accepted and for the additional overpayment of the DC to be reimbursed back to Mastercraft Starwood. And with that, Madam Chair, if there's any questions, more than happy to answer them. We've got Mr. Osterhout and Mr. Chenier with me as well.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. And I see Councillor Dudas has questions. Councillor Dudas?
Chair, I actually have a question for staff. Is this the appropriate time to ask, or?
Well, let me just see if anyone has any questions of the applicant. No, I see none. So yes, go ahead.
Okay, so my question to staff is, do city staff have, after having seen the chronological order, because once again, we've seen the emails and we're receiving it from Solway Wright. So that is certainly one aspect of the conversation. Do staff disagree with the chronological order or any of the information portrayed? Is there any nuance that we are not seeing in this documentation that you would like to fill us in on in terms of the gaps of that conversation?
So, Madam Chair, yes, I guess I would, in the sense that I don't dispute the actual, the chronological events. I mean, those are fact. We see the emails and the deficiency letters that were sent out by staff. And I guess we're into interpretation of those. I said at last committee, never was there an acknowledgement that a permit was ready to be issued. Staff made that clear, and they requested additional information on March 25th to confirm that the RSC filing, what the status of the RSC filing was. And that was done through the zoning examiner. That's their role to do. I appreciate the deficiency letters that the applicant has submitted. Those were building code deficiencies, and yes, those were cleared off. But there was still the applicable law piece that done through the zoning examiner. And it was clear then that they were waiting for management to look at the report from the consultant as to determine whether or not some risk could be taken at that point. It was staff's determination then that we weren't prepared to do that. That's not our normal course of business. The applicable law is clear that you need to have the filing of the RSC to the ministry before applicable law is met and a permit can be issued. So we were following the rules of the time. And as I said last meeting, there was another level of extraordinary circumstance that appeared on April the 3rd, which had staff reevaluate that position for the benefit of the industry. And we made the decision at that time that it was an acceptable level of risk considering the extraordinary circumstances. So yeah, so I'm not disputing the actual series of events that took place, but just interpretation of the events.
And I guess that really leads to my question, Richard, and that you've used the word clear twice when you're responding to me, and interpretation. And I, originally had really wanted to weigh in and proceed with staff's recommendation. But when I read through the emails, there was at least 2 instances in the conversation and the emails from staff that led to ultimately this confusion. And once again, I fully put it on the applicant to have the onus of meeting deadlines and timelines. But there's one point where a city staff member has said, it's okay, it's been, there's a sense of you've got extra time. And I think that unfortunately, Mike, unless you can tell me that there was another aside conversation we're not aware of that, didn't lead the applicant to believe that they had extra time, then I can't support staff on this, because
Right.
I think that there was a lot of confusion, and unfortunately, we have to be fair in the process. And I get you guys are working incredibly hard throughout the pandemic, but unless you can tell me that, then unfortunately I will have to vote in favor of the applicant.
Thank you, Councillor Dudas. Does anyone have, I see Councillor Brockington and Vice Chair Gower and now Councillor Cluche. Do any of you have questions of the applicant? No? Okay. So John, officially you and Mr. Osterhout and Mr. Chenier have served your duty, so to speak, and we'll go to questions of staff. So first up is Councillor Brockington.
Thanks, Chair, and good morning to you and colleagues. Yesterday, we were reminded at Council we weren't heritage experts. Today, we're trying to sift through basically legal back and forth, and it's very challenging to do this. I was at the last meeting going to uphold staff's decision, and then I met with the proponents and was enlightened by their journey, had actually time to listen to the various steps and stages they went through. And I do believe there is sufficient evidence to indicate that they thought they were doing everything in the right order, and they believed that even after April 1st passed, they would be able to do this. So similar to Councillor Dudas, I'm now leaning towards agreeing with the proponent on this. My question to staff, though, Madam Chair, is since our last committee meeting, did staff go back through the documentation, through the communication? Did they do any additional review of this matter? Was there any additional reflection?
Well, I'm just going to jump in there because it needs to be said, and I know that Councillor Dudas alluded to it. And I said this at the last meeting. This was an incredible time. We were at the beginning of COVID. We, more than any other city, absolutely in Ontario, knew that it was vital to get our permits through. And an extraordinary feat was undertaken. I think it was 185 or 187 permits were put through. This applicant actually benefited from that process that they would not have. Okay, so the question is today, is it likely that they, because of, in the midst of the whole thing, is it possible that they did receive a couple of emails that led them to believe that they didn't need to worry about the new charges until the fall? Well, staff have admitted that. Okay, they have, and but we cannot step back from the absolutely outstanding job they did, which literally kept Ottawa's economy and is the only thing that kept Ottawa's economy going. In advance of an uncertain announcement coming from the province as to, when construction had to stop, etc. It was very important to us, and we conscientiously and with the support of an outstanding team that did this. So those are the facts. I don't think we need to belabor them. I mean, it is absolutely the facts, and I don't think Mr. Ash is arguing that. Are you, Mr. Ash? No.
So I'm not calling.
Back to you. Sorry.
I'm not calling into question staff's good work. I'm just asking, since our last committee meeting, did our legal team go back and do any additional review or analysis to see? If they didn't, then that's fine. I want to make sure our process is solid, because there could be other proponents. Like when I first came to office, Madam Chair, I had 2 cases that came represented by a well-known lobbyist that we know that said, hey, Riley, before you got elected, 2 planning files were held up in your ward. We want a refund on our DCs. And I even came to you for one of them. I don't expect you to remember, but I just want to make sure if we make a decision today, we're not putting the city in any type of future liability. This will come back. And maybe
why don't we ask Mr. Mark? He's got his hand up in the air. Good question. Mr. Mark?
Yes, Madam Chair, there is a time limit, I recall, of 90 days for filing a complaint in respect of development charges. And so that would have passed around July 4, 2020, in respect of the permits issued on April 4th. So the opportunity to challenge this has passed for all the other building permits issued that day.
Sure. Okay. I won't belabor the point. DCs go up, whether it's an annual basis or not, and people could make similar arguments in the future about files being held up and I had to pay more and wasn't my fault. So I just raised that today. Anyway, Madam Chair, I appreciate the time to ask the question. That's it for me. Thank
you very much. I'm going to go to Councillor Cloutier before Vice Chair Gower. Councillor Cloutier?
Thank you, Madam. Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to Mr. Ash who reached out to me and we had a short conversation, and like others, to the proponent. Chair Harder, you referred to that incredible time of the end of March, where we had the emergence of COVID and the emergency order, the transitional rules, and what we've got is a very complex building permit. I learned about excavation permits and foundational permits and conditional permits. And let me say, just to, again, Chair Harder, and I think Councillor Brockington said, Building Code Services do an extraordinary job. They do an extraordinary job all the time, especially at this very complex time. And I want to thank them for the work they do. I want to also mention, perhaps, Mr. Ash spoke about the interpretation. We are into interpretation. The building permit that was issued on April 4th was issued on the basis of information prior to March 31st. I guess the question is, and I will have a question, what is fair in these circumstances? I acknowledge that staff have to implement the rules. And so maybe I have a question for Mr. Mark. Mr. Mark, are there legal circumstances whereby staff, if they felt it was appropriate, because of fairness, because of complexity, because of perhaps ambiguity of a March 25th email, are there legal circumstances for staff if they felt it was appropriate to reverse, to adjust DCs, let me just use that term in the context, and interpretation without intervention such as the planning committee or council?
Madam
Right?
Chair.
Opportunity for staff to do that.
Madam Chair, it occurs to me that there could be circumstances where the type of factors that the councillor identified would lead staff to authorizing a refund without going to committee. Staff reviewed this one. They considered whether or not such circumstances exist. You have the recommendation that resulted from that review.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. And so now, perhaps as Mr. Ash suggested, it's interpretation, it's acknowledging the complex environment that we were working in at the end of March 2020. So thank you. Like others, like Councillor Dudas has said, I believe at the last meeting, I was ready to accept staff's recommendation. I have revised my position, and I will not be supporting staff's recommendation. But I really appreciate Mr. Ash reaching out and the answer that you've given me, Mr. Mark. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I see Councillor Moffat has put his hand up, but we'll go to Vice Chair Gower now.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I moved to defer this at the last meeting, and I think many of the committee members have had a chance to take more time to review this. It sounds like many of you have met like I have with the applicant, and also conferred with staff on the issue. Echoing what some of my colleagues have already said, I think staff did apply the policy and the bylaw that they had available to them. They adhered to the deadlines that as council we've directed them to. So I do want to acknowledge that staff did their best in following council direction. But I think what's happened here and how I've reviewed it is that's resulted in an unfair assessment of charges against this particular developer. And we certainly do have a role of committee and council at making a decision to ensure fairness, even when policy and bylaw may handcuff staff's ability to do that. To me, this is very similar to the file we had in Britannia and Bay Ward back earlier in the summer, where staff applied policy on development charge assessment to the T, but it resulted in an unfair situation for the property owners. And in that case, our committee decided to refund those development charges. And I think that's the appropriate thing to do in this case as well. I have a motion, Chair, that would sustain the development charge complaint. So I'm not sure if this is the appropriate time to introduce that to committee. I can read it right now.
Sure, go ahead, and then Councillor Moffat will have his time to speak.
Okay. So it's coming up on the screen. The motion is that Planning Committee recommend Council approve that the development charge complaint in respect of 500 Preston be sustained, and that the applicable municipal development charge be at the rate in effect on March 31st, 2020.
And that is a replacement motion. Anything else, Councillor Vice Chair Gower? No,
that's all that I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Moffat?
Thank you. Appreciate that. It's unfortunate I missed the committee meeting a couple weeks ago when we discussed this. But I think Councillor Gower mentioned the Britannia situation. That was a bit more of a slam dunk. It was a bit more obvious that there was a situation that kind of arose that I believe staff have actually taken steps to avoid situations like that in the future. This one's a bit more gray. To Councillor Brocken's point, are we really equipped with this? Well, Councillor Harder will remember quite well that her and I and Councillor Kadri went through about 25 years worth of applications to the Court of Revision a few years back. And I don't think we felt like experts there, but it was judging the gray. It was clearing up the gray and some of the different things that had come up. I think we went as far back as 1992 in an area that even predated Councillor Dean's election in, I think I want to say Kemp Park, with a local improvement process down there that was wild to deal with. But in a case like this, I think there was I don't think staff's wrong in what they did. I don't think at all. They didn't, in their estimation, they didn't have what they needed to issue the permit prior to April 1st. Now, if it had been more clear to the applicant and to the applicant's points in the email exchange that we've all seen now, would they have submitted their documentation early enough to give staff time to provide that permit before April 1st? Possibly. I think that's the gray. And that's where we, you almost apply that lens of with a reasonable, without a reasonable doubt or whatever. And I think in this case, there likely are enough concerns there, enough, there's enough gray there for us to side with the applicants, the appellant, sorry, in this case. But again, I don't lay this at the hands of staff. I think that's unfair. If anyone did suggest that, I think that's unfair. It's our job here now to determine the nature of this complaint and whether it's valid. And I think there's enough in front of us here today and with Councillor Gower's motion to support that motion. So thank you.
Thank you. Very well said. So that's all the hands that I see. And so we have a replacement motion, which Vice Chair Gower has introduced. On the motion, that is to approve that the development charge complaint in respect of 500 Preston Street be sustained, and that the applicable municipal development charge be at the rate in effect on March 31st, 2020. Does that carry?
Carried.
Carried.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Ash. Thank you, Mr. Mark. And thank you again for the amazing feat that you undertook last year while Frank Bedin was still here at that time. All right, the next item, we're having a presentation, and it's the 1770 Hetherington Road. It's a zoning bylaw amendment to allow a Boys and Girls Club. Wendy, are you doing the presentation?
Yes, I am, Madam Chair.
Okay, and then we have 3 delegates here to speak if needed. So take it away.
Thank you. Good morning. This is the presentation for the city-initiated zone amendment for 1770 Hetherington Road. Next slide, please. The property is located on the west side of Hetherington Road, approximately 60 meters south of the intersection of Walkley and Hetherington Roads. Commercial development is located to the north, residential to the east and south, and the rear portion of this property abuts the rear portion of the Ministry of Transportation's Driver Examination Center. Hetherington Park is located to the southwest. Next slide, please. This is a recent photo of the site. It's generally vacant, and this is looking south to the residential development. Next slide, please. The site is currently zoned General Industrial Subzone 1, Exception 2663. And this zone permits a wide variety of industrial uses, but also includes uses such as an office, instructional facility, and recreation and athletic facility up to 1,700 square meters in gross floor area. The proposed zoning bylaw amendment is to add community center and urban agriculture as permitted uses, as well as to reduce the required parking and eliminate the requirement for a loading space for a community center. This amendment will facilitate the development of a Boys and Girls Club with a floor area of approximately 1,500 square meters on a portion of the site fronting on Hetherington Road. Next slide, please. This is the preliminary site plan showing the building fronting on Hetherington Road, parking to the north, landscaped area to the west. Next slide. And this is these are just a few preliminary concept plans of what the building may look like. It should be noted that the amendment applies to the entire site, although the Boys and Girls Club will only be leasing a portion of this property. The survey work is still taking place to confirm the lease boundaries, and plans have not been finalized for the development of the remainder of the site, but will include residential uses and a public park. A future zoning amendment may refine the boundaries to reflect the final overall development. Also, since the writing of the report, it has been clarified that the club will be developing a garden, but not for community use, so it does not fall within the definition of urban agriculture. We recommended that this use be added, as it may be a use to the overall picture. This is a photo taken in 2011 of the site. The property has been owned by the city since 1959 and was a municipal works yard from the mid-1960s until it was decommissioned in the 2010s. The structures that you see on that aerial have been removed and the site is currently vacant. Next slide, please. The Hetherington Neighborhood Revitalization Strategy was completed in 2018 and was sparked by a discussion of the redevelopment of this site. Through consultation, the top priorities included a youth drop-in center, sports center, medical center, cultural center, and mental health and social supports. The Boys and Girls Club has the potential to offer many of these programs. As committee members may recall, Council at its meeting on December 18, 2020, approved an investment of $5 million of its COVID-19 resilience funding from the federal government for a youth services facility and a partnership with the Boys and Girls Club for a facility on a leased portion of 1770 Hetherington Road. This amendment is one of the approvals to facilitate the project. Next slide, please. In conclusion, staff recommend approval of the amendment to add community center and urban agriculture as permitted uses and reduce the parking and eliminate the loading space requirements for a community center. Thank you. I would be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Wendy. We do have 3 delegates before we go to any questions that anyone might have of you. And they are Dan Reese, the Senior Manager, Boys and Girls Club, Leila Emrys from Hoban Architecture, and Doug Vandenham, also from Hoban. It says here that if necessary, so I imagine that you're here to answer questions, whoever is the lead person. Does anyone have any questions? No? So do you still need to speak if we don't have any questions for you? Other than to say thank you very much for choosing this site. I know how important it is to the community and certainly to Councillor Deans and Councillor Pluche, who represents across the street. But the Building Better Revitalized Neighborhood, this is exactly a major direction that we hope to go in. And so we thank you very much. Are any of these people on the screen, Ms. Duffany?
Just Dan Reese.
So Dan, do you need to say anything?
Not if necessary, but just, yeah, I mean, as an organization, the Boys and Girls Club of Ottawa is absolutely thrilled. We've been running a small program in that community for quite a number of years, but to have an opportunity now to really make a significant impact in that community, we're beyond thrilled about this.
Thank you very much. And so now, any questions for Wendy, for Ms. C? No? All right. Well, thank you, everybody. So before us is the zoning bylaw amendment for 1770 Hetherington Road that the Planning Committee recommend Council approve an amendment to zoning bylaw 2008-250 for 1770 Hetherington Road to permit community center, and urban agriculture as detailed in document 2. Is that carried?
Carried.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Carried.
That's great. All right, going on to number 3. Again, we have a presentation. We have quite a few speakers. This was a very large project. I know that Councillor McKenney is on with us today. I saw her. I'm not seeing her right now, but I know she's here. And our staff, I can't even tell you how many conversations I've had with Alain Miglis on this file. But we're having a presentation, and then we'll go to, I think, Councillor Leeper. You have a couple of motions to move after that. So take it away, Tabby.
Good morning.
Hello. I was actually wondering where you were. I hadn't seen you in so long, and now I know you've been tied up with the official plan amendment for Corso Italia Station District Secondary Plan and zoning bylaw amendments, etc. Go ahead.
Yes, I've been very busy. Good morning, Madam Chair and members of the committee. Thank you very much for the opportunity to present the overview of this official plan amendment, the zoning amendment built from the Corso Italia District planning study. The area, can we move to the next slide? The area for the secondary plan shown here in red is the last of 3 planning studies that originally began in 2006, when the Transportation Master Plan identified 3 future transit stations along the existing O-Train corridor. We've got the Bayview Station, the Preston Carling Station, and the Gladstone Station, now called Corso Italia. Bayview and Preston Carling secondary plans have been completed. Like those other districts, the study area will undergo significant growth and change, and much of this area surrounding the station is designated as mixed-use center in the current official plan. In the future, the Corso Italia O-Train station will serve as an important launching point to access the downtown and the broader city, but also as a destination, even more so than the neighborhood is today. Within the 36 hectares making up the district, many of the lands are vacant and underutilized. And if we could move to the next slide. This aerial photo shows a number of the large parcels in the district, and many of them are viable and have important uses on them, but a number of the sites are underutilized, and I just want to point out that a couple of them. The Ottawa Community Housing redevelopment parcels, there's 2 of them, and those are shown with the blue dashed lines. Those are 818 Gladstone to the east, or to the right of the screen, and 933 Gladstone in the center of the screen. And those are the subject of the 2 zoning amendments in the present report. The green dashed line shows 1010 Somerset Street, which is currently owned by the federal government, but the city's corporate real estate office is set to acquire this large parcel, and is the subject of a report going to FEDCO on March the 2nd. These are large vacant sites near a transit station, and they provide us with a rare opportunity to develop an entirely new mixed-use, transit-oriented development and neighborhood in the heart of the city. Next slide, please. The secondary plan has been prepared through an extensive consultation process. As a result of the input and collaboration, the plan offers a bold new vision that is generally supported by the community and the stakeholders. Next slide. The vision focuses on 4 key areas. That's character areas, built form, public realm, and mobility. A few of the key policy directions coming out of this include significant support for the public realm throughout the district. And that includes things like the new 1 hectare park at 1010 Somerset Street, an expanded Piazza Dante Park, a new active transportation bridge crossing the O-Train corridor, pedestrian and cyclist pathway at City Center Avenue coming into the 1010 Somerset Street site and going further into the site. And a really key important part as well is expanding the density of pedestrian cycling network over the entire district. So with the support of this active transportation and transit, the plan aims to reduce automobile activity and car dependence in general. Another key policy direction is to concentrate density in taller buildings in general along the O-Train corridor, which allows for transitions to low-rise areas. So this helps to reinforce the area's existing character, its heritage qualities in certain places along the traditional Main Street corridors, and it also helps to protect pockets of low-rise residential uses. Next slide. So very quickly, I'll move through the recommendations. And the first recommendation is a big one. It's to approve the official plan amendment. And there are a number of components here. The first component is to amend Schedule B of the official plan to modify the boundary of the mixed-use center, the general urban area, and to extend the Gladstone traditional Main Street, which will help us to better align with official plan policy and the province's mandate for smart growth around rapid transit stations. The second component is to amend the road right-of-way protection table in the official plan. This will help to set the framework for improved public realm and mobility along Gladstone Avenue and Rochester Street. I just want to note that the additional width will be allocated to prioritize conditions that support active transportation. So for bike lanes, widened sidewalks, and street trees, not to add more vehicular lanes. The third item is to repeal the existing Preston Champaign secondary plan, which is the area subject currently from the existing plan. The secondary plan was approved 27 years ago, and in many cases, it just doesn't respond well to the change occurring in the district that day, and we see moving in the future. The fourth item is just to introduce this new Corso Italia secondary plan into Volume 2 of the official plan. And fifth and lastly, there's a recommendation to add the secondary plan study as a major, as a protected major transit station area. The PMTSA is a discretionary tool for municipalities to establish transit supportive densities and uses within a defined area that surround a rapid transit station. And it also is where inclusionary zoning may be applied in the future. There is no appeal with respect to policies that identify as PMTSAs. If we can just move to the next slide. Recommendation B is an amendment to designate the secondary planning study area as Area Z on Schedule A of the city's zoning bylaw. Under this zoning regime, the new developments would not be required to provide a minimum number of parking spaces for new developments. Much of the study area falls under the Area Z zoning regime currently, but some do not, and the proposed rezoning will update the parking performance standards to better align with the downtown setting. Next slide. The zoning amendment set the two separate properties that I noted before at 818 Gladstone and 933 Gladstone. Though these are owned by Ottawa Community Housing, this is the City of Ottawa's arm's length affordable housing provider. They are partnered with the city and upper tier governments to implement affordable housing developments at the subject sites. And it's really important that the approvals, that their approvals are obtained in a timely manner to meet with their funding requirements. So the City of Ottawa has initiated the zoning amendments to coincide with the completion of the secondary planning process. Next slide. This is just a snapshot of the amendment at Gladstone. What will happen here is the site will be rezoned from a TM zone, an R4 zone, to a TM15 zone, and an R5BB and R4T zone, which expands the permission of ranges and built forms. So it includes low-rise buildings, mid-rise and high-rise, as well as some exceptions to performance standards. And it's just worth noting in areas D and E that we would permit high-rise buildings along the southern edge of the site nearest Raymond Street and the Queensway. Next slide. The amendment at 933 Gladstone rezones the site from the current MC F1.5 zone to an MC17 subzone, and it removes the maximum floor space index of 1.5 and replaces it with specific height provisions. The area closest to the residential uses, existing residential uses that you see in Area A, This is proposed to be changed to R4T zone, which is a low rise zoning. Next slide. 1D recommendation is to designate the entire Corso Italia study area as a special public realm improvement district. And this will allow the city to do a few things. It will be able to direct all cash and parkland collected through development applications within the district to be used within the district. The main purpose here being to acquire new parkland or to make improvements to existing parks. The second is similar. It's to direct all contributions from Section 37 or the future community benefits charge bylaw, which would be collected and used within the district. And the third is just to do a review and assess the need for a potential area-specific development charges bylaw for Corso Italia. So that's just further research. Next slide. Um, 1E recommends designate the study area as the PMTSA, and I've covered this in the previous slide, so we can move on. And 1F is to direct basically the official plan process, the new official plan process. Existing secondary plans are being reviewed for consistency and in cases consolidated with other secondary plans for areas that are neighboring each other and where there is some policy overlap. So this recommendation will incorporate the Corso Italia Station District Secondary Plan as part of a broader West Downtown core secondary plan that would include the Bayview Station and the Preston Carling Station when consolidated as well. Next slide. The final recommendation here is a standard one. It's just to ensure that documentation of oral and written submissions, including submissions between the publication of the staff report and the time of the council's decision, are recorded. Next slide. I just want to thank you again for the opportunity to present this piece of work, and I'd be pleased to answer any further questions at this time.
Thanks very much, Tavi. We will have that opportunity to do so after we run through our delegations. We have several of them. First up is Christine McQuaig, Q9 Planning and Design. Christine, I know you're here.
Yes, I'm here.
And everyone who's on the list to speak, you have 5 minutes. Following you is Greg Meads with Bison Hunter, and following Greg would be Gordon McKechnie, Canadian Banknote. Go ahead, please.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of Planning Committee. My name is Christine McQuaig, as said, with Q9 Planning and Design. I'm here as a planning consultant on behalf of the Canadian Banknote Company. Actually, is the presentation being shared? I had to switch to my phone because my power went out, so I can't tell.
Coming up.
Perfect.
Okay.
Here with me today is Gordon McKechnie and Michael Besley from Canadian Banknote, as well as Greg Meads, Greg Clunas, and Pierre-Guy Lalonde. Next slide, please. As many of you are aware, the Canadian Banknote facility is highlighted here in yellow. The dark black line is the border of the Corso Italia CDP lands. Next slide, please. The CBN facility was built in the early 1960s, has approximately 80,000 square feet of manufacturing use with 400 direct high-paying jobs and supports another 1,000 high-paying jobs. This facility is currently compliant with ministry noise regulations. Next slide, please. The first issue I'd like to discuss is that the proposed amendments and their compliance with provincial policy statement. Next slide, please. It is our opinion that, apologies here, I'm, like I said, I have to use my phone, so it's a little bit difficult to see things. So I just want to draw your attention to section 1261, where it says that sensitive land uses shall be planned and developed to avoid or minimize and mitigate any potential adverse effects from noise to ensure the long-term operational and economic viability of major facilities, which I think it's clear that CBN facility is a major facility for employment. Where avoidance is not possible in accordance with the above policy, planning authorities shall protect the long-term viability of existing manufacturing uses that are vulnerable to the encroachment by ensuring that planning and development of proposed sensitive land uses are only permitted if the following criteria is demonstrated: that there's an identified need for the use, that alternative locations have been evaluated and there are no reasonable alternative locations, that adverse effects to the proposed sensitive land uses are minimized and mitigated, and that potential impacts to manufacturing or other uses are minimized and mitigated. And the last point is very critical. 3 of those 4 criteria in general have not been met for this rezoning, most notably the mitigation to CBN. In section 1.3 employment of the provincial policy statement, the City of Ottawa shall promote economic development and competitiveness by taking into account the needs of existing and future businesses. And this is so that their continued operation is not jeopardized by the encroachment of noise-sensitive uses. Next slide, please. When discussing land use compatibility, of course, especially on the matter of noise, it's important to review what the ministry compliance means. Next slide, please. So in this case, CBN must assess and maintain compliance on an ongoing basis, which means when likely future uses of reception points have changed. For example, when the Public Works building was demolished, CBN had to change their assessment at that time because the likely future use had changed. Noise compliance is based on points of reception for noise-sensitive uses, and these receptors apply in consideration of zoning, heights, context, and that likely future use. The guiding noise document is specific to say that these considerations are required to be assessed even if there's no approval in place for a proposal. Next slide, please. In reviewing sort of the change of that context in terms of likely future use, this is an overview of how the proposed amendments here today change that use. The area in pink are the proposed official plan amendments, which are going from general urban area, which is predominantly low rise, to mixed use center, which readily supports high rise buildings, which means higher receptor points. The area in blue is the zoning amendment for 933 Gladstone, which is altering the existing zoning where there's a maximum FSI of 1.5, which informs lower density and generally lower building heights, to a zone with a very specific building height schedule. In other words, the number of stories depicted are to be expected regardless of the zoning, including an actual building as part of that amendment. Next slide, please. So to give a general overview here, the approval of the secondary plan and those amendments change the proposed heights and the likely future uses. It creates new higher points of reception that are difficult to mitigate, and compliance is required as soon as those likely future uses have changed, meaning that the proposed compliance is imminent, not when site plan control is submitted. In other cases, this cost has been in excess of $4 million, and this is at another example in Ottawa. The cost of compliance should be the responsibility of the parties wishing to change the zoning. You can jump down to, not the next slide, but the one after that. In terms of what needs to happen and what has already been requested earlier in the CDP process, a noise study or noise assessment at the minimum to determine what mitigation measures are required and even if compliance can be obtained. A means of ensuring the cost of mitigation does not fall on CBN. This needs to happen at the forefront of land use changes to ensure PPS compliance, not at the back end. Cost mitigation has 2 components, immediate and long-term for the continued operation of the facility. We kindly request that Planning Committee consider the implication to CBN and defer or hold the zoning at this time to allow for the proper process to follow to ensure PPS compliance. Should the zoning proceed at a later date, it's the responsibility of the proponent, being the City of Ottawa, to enter into an agreement for cost with CBN. I just want to finish one sentence. We want to be clear that CBN fully supports the development of affordable housing and would prefer not to delay their construction, but they must protect their interests as the cost implications are significant. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Meads, I've got you down here for 5 minutes. Is that what your intention is? And then Mr. McKechnie?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll be very brief. Ms. McQuaig has covered most of the items that I wanted to speak to. I just want to reiterate, from my perspective, what is front and center here is the lack of consistency with the PPS and section 1.2.6.2 that Ms. McQuaig referred to. It's clear to us, and it doesn't appear anywhere in the staff report, to the contrary, that this provision of the PPS has not been addressed. It's very clear that if you can't avoid that potential conflict, then prior to establishing the use, prior to considering the rezoning, those 4 items have to be assessed, and they have not been assessed, save and except for possibly the first item, which is the need for the use, the sensitive land use, the affordable housing. No one disputes that. But there's been no efforts made to address how mitigation will be made, enter an agreement with Canadian Banknote Company to address those issues. Both the ministry's guidelines and the city's guidelines are very clear that such an agreement is to be in place prior to approval of the use, which is the zoning, and that those mitigation costs are to be solely at the expense of the developer or the proponent, and is not to cost the Canadian Banknote Company anything. If the zoning goes ahead, that won't be the case, because we will have to comply immediately with the likely height of those noise receptors, costing my client millions of dollars. Exactly the same scenario that we run into at their property on Richmond Road as a result of an application by Claridge 8 or 9 years ago, where the city did not require such an agreement, and in that case we're still stuck in a 9-year LPAT dispute. So we want to avoid that, obviously, but Canadian Banknote, of course, has to protect its interests. Thank you.
Thank you. And we will be hearing from legal, and I know that Alain Nicholas and I had a long discussion about this yesterday. So I'll go to Gordon McKechnie if Gordon has anything to say prior to going to the questions I have Vice Chair Gower and Councillor Leeper. So Mr. McKechnie? Do you have more to add, or are you here for to answer questions? I mean, yes. Are you here?
I'm here now.
Thank you.
I had to follow the instruction, press Control Alt A or something, so I'm sorry to delay you. Just to give you context, I'm a Senior Vice President at Canadian Banknote. And I wanted to speak to you because I'm really not very happy that we're here today at a time when I have to object to a proposal that I think is in the interest of the city and the interest of citizens of Ottawa. But we're not coming to you at the 11th hour either. I first wrote to the city on this topic in 2015. And what consistently happens, and it's happened to us on other sites, as Greg Meads mentioned, is that there's a lack of understanding of the interplay between the rules that are established by the Ministry of the Environment for the operations of our facilities and the city development process. And I just need to, I think, give you context of the nature of the challenge we face. So when you approve this zoning change, we then have to ensure that any noise generated from our facility does not exceed a noise power reading of more than 45 decibels at a point of reception. So if you look at the presentation materials, you can see that there's 30-story towers contemplated. Those points of reception are very hard to protect from the roof noises generated from our facility. Now, I think it's important to understand the context of 45 decibels. Some of you may have ridden in something like a Tesla sedan or a Rolls-Royce Ghost. The interior noise level in those vehicles is 68 decibels. We have to achieve 45, which is a dramatically lower number than the sound you would get in one of those cars at 60 miles an hour. It's a very challenging thing to do, and it's very expensive. And we have been completely compliant on this facility. I mean, Councillor Leeper may recall that I made him a promise when we bought the facility. He was then the head of the community association, and that was that we would really be conscious of our neighbors and we would be very compliant, and we have kept that promise. we abided by all the rules. We're in the process right now of trying to re-engineer our HVAC system at a significant cost. If this proposal is approved today, all that engineering goes out the window because we cannot achieve that compliance. And now I have to re-engineer the whole thing. If this had been done in a different way with compliance with the city's own rules, we wouldn't be here today. And that's why I am upset. I think it's unfair to the citizens of Ottawa, and I think it's unfair to our company. What we're really asking now is we've abided by the rules. We want the city to abide by the rules. That is only fair. And if the approval goes ahead today, what you're deciding, and there's really two questions at issue here. One is it important for the proponent to be compliant with the rules? You are the proponent, the City of Ottawa. And the second is, should a long-standing adjacent property owner bear the costs of the development? If you go ahead today, you're answering that question this way, that it doesn't matter how much it costs and CBN should pay. And that's not right. And I think you as our elected representatives have to make sure that we are following the rules, not just that we impose on our citizens, but that we impose them on ourselves as a city. And so we are an important employer. We literally have spent millions of dollars in compliance on noise in the city. And I can honestly tell you, I've never had a complaint, never had a noise complaint, other than people will complain about snow removal out of our parking lot. But we're not a noisy operation, but we're caught in between a rock and a hard place here. And we really want to cooperate with the city, but we don't want to pay for this development. So I do ask you to defer this. There is a way forward. The way forward is an agreement. We're working with the developers of the Loretta property. We are close to inking an agreement with them. We are close now to inking an agreement with the developers of the property adjacent to our Richmond Road facility. And so there's precedents available for what this looks like. But basically it has to look like we cooperate, but we don't have to pay for it. And so that's why I'm asking you to defer this approval. And I should make clear, our objection is only in relation to 933 Gladstone. 818 is far enough away that it's not a problem.
Thank you. Thank you. Questions? No, you have other people with you that will jump in should the questions lead in that direction. I'm going to trust you, Christine, to redirect them. Vice Chair Gower.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I have a lot of questions, but many of them are going to be for staff later on because there have been quite a few points raised here. Mr. McKechnie mentioned that this was first raised with staff in 2015. I was just wondering if any of you could give us a better sense of how CBN was involved in or if you were involved in the overall consultation process leading up to this secondary plan report in front of us. And if I'm hoping that this isn't the first time staff have heard about these concerns, and what kind of correspondence or what kind of how have staff responded so far to these concerns, I guess? Where are you at in terms of formal response or consultation with staff on this?
Sorry,
was that a question for staff or for me, Mr.
Gower? For the
delegation. For the CBN representatives.
I can tell you, I've been involved in the Gladstone Station secondary plan development since 2015. I've attended the public meetings. I've made clear as best I could to both the developers that were interested and the city of this dilemma and this problem and how it needed to be grappled with. And frankly, what I was consistently met with was, this is too important for us to worry about that. And how can you think that we should have to worry about you? And that's not what the rules say. And so we are a very public-minded company. We don't like to complain about things. We support the community. And now we need the community to treat us the way we treat them.
Christine, you have more to add? Is that?
I was
you're-
add, Madam
not-
Chair. Pardon
Go
me?
ahead. If you have more to add to that, go ahead to answer the question.
Madam Chair, we also submitted a letter to staff. I believe it was in December, but like I said, my power is out, so I can't open my computer at the time. And I think the main issue, the city was aware of our concerns, and we were told that everything would be taken care of at the site plan control stage as a condition, but that removes a lot of ability for my client to have any sort of control in this component. And it's also inconsistent with what MECP is telling us when we need to be compliant. So they're telling us now that because these amount of stories are expected on those land uses, that we need to consider that now as opposed to at site plan control stage.
Okay, so Garrett is going to be speaking on the legal staff perspective. Mr. Mark tells me when Garrett heads up on that, those are questions that'll be coming your way. Back to you, Vice Chair Gower.
Yes, so Christine, you mentioned the PPS compliance protecting long-term viability of existing or planned industrial uses. How would you interpret that? Like, how far ahead do we look for planned industrial uses, or do we define that based on zoning requirements? I guess what I mean is currently you have a facility there, and it's fairly easy to assess what that facility is doing. Are there other plans for the property? Are there expansions you've planned? And does that, in your understanding, come into account when we're considering future industrial uses?
That is a component of it, yes. Through you, Madam Chair. It's an ongoing compliance component. So this facility existed before all these land uses started changing to include more noise sensitive land uses over time. So we have to account for this existing stationary noise source and ensure that it can continue to upgrade as it needs to over time, or expand as it needs to over time, which may include new HVAC systems, new machinery, et cetera. And that continued operation is contingent upon being noise compliant with the MECP. And the MECP is telling us that we need to be compliant as soon as those future uses and expected stories or change in use takes place, which occurs at the zoning stage.
Okay, yeah, I'll have a number of questions for staff, but thank you, Chair.
Councillor Leeper?
Thanks, Chair. Just to say, Gordon, good to see you again. Thanks for your team for being here today. Obviously, the community considers and has said explicitly in past that we want to see the banknote operation continue to operate as an important employer in the neighborhood. I think one of the questions that's going to arise from this discussion in the community for those folks who are watching is currently the operations at the Gladstone location are largely warehouse locations, and that any noise mitigation that's going to be required would be typical of a warehouse type facility. Do you anticipate that this would start moving more into the printing again? Because you'll recall the discussion we had not about noise, but about the odors that were emanating from the plant as a result of printing operations.
I can tell you, Councillor Leeper, that we currently don't have any plans to start printing in that facility, but it is much more than a warehouse. When we bought it, it was really a derelict building, although it did have a secret clearance from the Government of Canada. It's been restored, frankly, and now it is very high tech inside. We have a high tech research and development lab located inside the building. We have the new Canadian passport lines, which are very technology intensive. And so we make changes to our processes almost constantly because demand is driven by our customers, who are primarily governments around the world. And we have to respond to new technologies essentially every year. At the moment, because we are compliant with the noise regulations, we are entitled to make changes to the facility, provided that our experts in environmental controls have confirmed that we will remain compliant. If we go out of compliance, then we're violating our environmental certificate of approval, and we can no longer make any legal change to our processes. So the impact on the company can be severe. And so again, I'm sad that we're at this point in the process and this issue has not yet been addressed.
I know our staff are going to explain, why they don't agree with your interpretation, and I try to put myself in the hands of staff. I would love to get in and see the new high-tech stuff that you're doing, but I know for obvious reasons you won't let me in. Chair, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I don't see anyone else with their hands up at this point, so we'll go to our next presenter, Dr. Martin de Zuviria. I probably crucified your name. Dr. Martin de Zuviria. Are you here?
Here, maybe just unmuting.
Okay. Should we go on to the next delegation?
Sure.
There he is. Thank you for your presentation. I can see, I think, a little bit of you. Martin, you have 5 minutes for your presentation. Please proceed. Okay. Melody, do you see anything I'm not seeing there?
No.
Okay. Then we're going to move on to the next group, and they are representing Ottawa Community Housing, Cliff Udale, Ottawa Community Housing, Robert McNeil, Ottawa Community Housing, and Miguel Tremblay-Fotin. So Cliff, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. I just wanted to say thank you to staff and the councillors that have been involved in this process. This is a hugely important parcel of land from a city building perspective, both at the Somerset and our Gladstone development sites. I think the importance of that has shown up in the passion that's gone into the decision making and around and coming up with the proposals. It's been a long journey, but I just wanted to say on behalf of OCH, we're very thankful about the process, the level of engagement. It's been an incredibly thorough process. And as you know, we have already identified funding through CMHC to engage on both these sites, and we're eager to get going. It's time-constrained funding, so we're very much looking forward to this advancing and seeing the redevelopment of both those key areas. So really just a thanks to all for engagement.
Thank you. Martin, I see that you're there now, but I'm going to finish with the Ottawa Community Housing and then come back to you.
Oh, yeah.
Robert McNeil, Ottawa Community Housing. Robert?
Thank you. So yes, just to expand upon Cliff's comments, just very much wanted to thank our city colleagues, thank the ward councillor and Councillor Scott Moffat and Mathieu Fleury, thank the staff, Alain Miguelez and Tavi Sitam, Kevin Weary, Robin Sushin. We've enjoyed a great relationship with them over the years in advancing not only the secondary plan, but our interests in our two sites, Gladstone Village and Rochester Heights. We've had a presence on Rochester Heights going back to 1966. And so we are going to be revitalizing that property, our second go at it, if you will. We already have a building coming out of the ground on the north side of Gladstone, a 6-story building with 2 blocks of stacked townhomes that we're very proud of. We're very excited about continuing on these added lands in a phased manner over the years to come with affordable housing, with some private sector housing, retail, office, very much mixed use, mixed density, mixed income, mixed life stages. So yes, we're very, very pleased with what we've accomplished with the city's support and with our consultants' support as well. Foten Consultants and Hoban Architecture have been there along the way, and we couldn't have done this without them as well. So thank you very much. This is an exciting time, an exciting milestone for us, our organization, for affordable housing, and we believe the city and the neighborhood as a whole.
Thanks very much. Over to Miguel Tremblay. Miguel?
Thank you, Madam Chair. My role has been to support Ottawa Community Housing in their efforts, and in this case, dealing with the secondary plan, and then working with the city on the zoning. I may choose to use my time a little differently. I'll be honest. I don't think Ottawa Community Housing was aware in any meaningful way of the discomfort by the Canadian banknote. It was really staff's burden to deal with them, because this was a city-initiated zoning bylaw amendment. But I will take my time a little bit to speak to section 1262 and try to give you a little bit of comfort as to what I think will be staff's position. It's been articulated that there's a certain criteria for the city to evaluate these kind of proposals. I don't think there's any question that there's an identified need for affordable housing, and I recall that the banknote felt the same way. But there are other criterias here. Recall, if you will, that in terms of assessing the appropriateness of the land use and alternate locations, you're looking at this in the context of a comprehensive review in support of a secondary plan. So staff did entertain consideration of whether these properties were well suited working with Ottawa Community Housing. It's no secret that the driver as to why Ottawa Community Housing purchased these properties is because of the proximity to transit. So there is, through this process, a very clear understanding of what OCH is trying to achieve here and working with the city in terms of providing affordable housing and proximity to transit. So I would suggest that criteria B in that policy is addressed. And then criteria C and D, and I'm anticipating staff's response here, but we'll tell you that at the time of site plan, there will be detailed noise studies that assess what the obligations are for Ottawa Community Housing in terms of their construction, their windows, their walls. All of those elements will be factored in, being mindful of noise sources in proximity to the site. I know that's not what the banknote is angling for, but at the same time, they should take some comfort, as you will, that there will be detailed analysis at the time of site plan. And lastly, my remaining comment is this secondary plan is implementing policies that are actually well within the OP. The Ottawa Community Housing lands and the majority of the lands within the secondary plan area are already designated mixed use center in the current version of the official plan. Those policies already support 30-story buildings in proximity to the transit station. If you're within 400 or 200 meters of a station, you can go to 30 stories. And all the other heights that are shown in the Ottawa Community Housing lands that are now part of this secondary plan and implemented through the zoning are actually anchored in your existing policies. There are additional policies related to land use and more design and parking and things like that. But the principles of height and density and residential in proximity to the station are already there in your official plan. It's just being articulated now through this secondary plan and through the zoning. So anyways, I'll leave it to that, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Vice Chair Gower has questions of Ottawa Community Housing.
Miguel, maybe if you could just clarify what you're saying then. Well, in relation to what we just heard from CBN, they were saying that they would have to be in compliance as soon as the zoning is approved. But what I heard from you, I guess, is the zoning's already there for quite a bit of height and so on, and so they should be in compliance already. Or am I misunderstanding that? Or am I making too big of a leap there? You're on mute, Miguel.
No, my comments were that the OP already contemplates and encourages heights in these locations. The zoning is not in place, but the secondary plan and the zoning are very much anchored in existing policies. And I just don't want to leave the impression to the committee that as a result of the Gladstone secondary or the Corso Italia secondary plan and the zoning, that these are new notions and new concepts. That height was already contemplated in your council approved documents. That was my point.
Okay, thank you for clarifying. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Okay, well, thank you for coming out today. I don't see any more questions, but we'll go back now to Martin. Where did you go now? There you are. And how do you say your last name, Doctor?
Subiria. It is a
I wasn't even close.
Spanish family name. So thank you very much, Madam Chair. I would like to bring my perspective as a resident. I am the owner of a detached home that was built before 1903, located at 477 Booth Street between Arlington Avenue and Raymond Street. And I would like to say that I oppose the rezoning of the land on Area D of this official plan amendment and zoning. This Area D is located exactly across the street from my home at the intersection of Raymond Street and Booth Street. The plan to rezone this Area D involves changing its current maximum height of any construction from 11 meters just to allow the construction of a 26-floor building together with other low-rise buildings. I bought my property in 2006 mainly because the area is residential, and this plan from the City of Ottawa will have an important and negative impact on my way of living. I have two questions for this committee and one remark. My first question is, I would like to know the impact of this proposed rezoning on my taxes within the next 10 years. The second question is, I would like to know the studies of the potential traffic increase on Booth Street derived from dramatically increasing the population density on this area. And in addition to these questions, I would like to add that I do not have much hope that anything that I say here would have an impact on any decision made by this committee. And this is not a sarcastic, but a realistic comment. When I see, as a resident, again, that a fortune has been spent on demolishing all constructions of this Sector D and surrounding sectors, and on the remediation of the soil and leveling of the area, and all of this done rapidly, this could mean that some kind of understanding, even if not written, between the City of Ottawa and the investors was already in place. And of course, the alternative view to this one is that companies investing funds on this type of projects spend fortunes without expecting anything in return from the city. This is why I have little hope that my opposition to this part of the official plan, together with my views and concerns, will have any impact at all on this process. I submitted previously these comments, and as I can see, they did not make any difference so far. However, I ask this committee to do the right thing and please take my opposition to rezoning of Area D, in spite of any kind of understanding that the City of Ottawa might have in place with the investors. And also I would like just to consider that most city employees and interested parties attending these and similar meetings are paid to attend, while residents like myself may lose precious hours of paid work that may not be recovered. So I believe that it will be great if the committee will do the right thing and respect and consider the views of residents like myself and defer the approval of the rezoning of Area D. So thank you very much, Madam Chair, and everyone for listening to me.
Thank you very much. And I see that Councillor McKenney, your councillor, has a question for you. And also, sir, when the questions that you pose, we'll get those answers for you when we get into questions of staff. Okay?
Thank you.
Councillor McKenney.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mr. DeSulia, for coming out today. I just want to clarify with you before I ask questions of staff on some of the points that you raised. When you say that you would like to see the rezoning for this section deferred, do you? Is your opposition to the entire block, including the the low rise, like the townhomes that would be facing Booth? Or is it mostly with respect to the high rise that would be fronting onto Raymond? So again, recognizing that you're on Booth, you know, and that's that you would be facing that section of the block. But I just wanted to clarify: is it the entire block, or is it that one building? And is, because I want to consider if there's, you know, what mitigating measures have been taken or can be taken to lessen the impact on you. And also, second question I have for you is your concern also that that you would be impacted at some point beyond Booth Street, because the secondary plan ends at Booth Street for a very particular reason, and that's because we don't want to see these changes encroach beyond on Booth Street. Like it's very clear where the secondary plan ends. So just for clarity before I go to staff.
Thank you very much, Councillor McKenney, for your interest on this. And I would like to say that my main opposition is to have just a tower of 26 floors right across the street from my home. So it is mainly that, the opposition, not to lower rise buildings. And when I talk about the traffic, and I ask for the studies, if you're a resident like me, you will notice that the traffic is terrible already on Booth Street, and I don't see how to change the population density on the whole area from 4,000 to 15,000. It will be a disaster, considering that it's very bad now. So I don't see how this will be managed.
Yeah, I am one of your neighbors. I don't live too far away, so I do know that the traffic downtown is very difficult for sure. Bad. Yeah, which is why we have to drive people to other modes of transportation. It's we can't accommodate on our roadways. But thank you for that clarification, and I will be following up with staff on that.
Thanks a lot, Councillor McKenney.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. All right, now we're going to questions of staff. Who's going to be first? Councillor Gower, Vice Chair Gower.
Thank you, Chair. I do want to ask some of the Canadian banknote questions, but there's actually one piece of correspondence that we received this week from TIP Gladstone that I know staff have had a chance to review. Their concern was about, in the staff report, the proposed amendment seeks to require a 22-meter wide right-of-way along Gladstone between Loretta and 106 meters west of Preston Street. And they were asserting that the current right-of-way is 20 meters, which would be sufficient. I just wondering if staff could comment on that so we had the response on the record for that particular concern.
Yeah. Yes, hello. I can, through you, Madam Chair. Yeah, just to clarify, the what's being proposed with the amendment to the right-of-way protection table is 22 meters, but it would be 2 meters on the south side only. So it would not be affecting the property that's on the north side of Gladstone.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and sorry, just to elaborate on that, that was specifically in recognition of the because the development application for 951 Gladstone and 145 Gladstone had already been received, and there had been some work that had been advanced by our development review services with that application. So we saw that opportunity had sailed for that particular place.
Okay, and okay, thank you. I wanted to make sure we clarified that for the delegation who'd emailed us on that one. On Canadian banknote, so obviously there's concern from CBN about when they're required to update their noise assessment and compliance with the MECP. And their assertion is that noise compliance is as soon as zoning is approved. Could staff comment on that and try to help us as a committee interpret what the requirements are?
Madam Chair, through you, I'm happy to respond to Councillor Gower's question. Councillor Gower, I think, has hit the nail on the head in terms of narrowing down the crux of the disagreement between city staff and the consultants for Canadian banknote. It's this issue of when Canadian banknote will be required to update their compliance. And it comes down to the definition of what a point of reception is in the ministry's guidelines for noise. Our staff and have spoken in depth with Canadian Banknote's legal counsel and their consultants to try to iron out this issue, but we continue to be of the view that Canadian Banknote should not be required to update their compliance noise assessment until site plan approval. I can walk you through just quickly why that is. Point of reception is defined in the guideline as a place where a noise sensitive, the location on a noise sensitive land use where that noise is received, and it defines the places that specifically you have to look at. And for example, it's like window faces where at a residential building, where the use is not yet established. They still have to consider the point of reception, but where the lot is merely zoned and not a building permit hasn't yet been approved, they use a standard. They're supposed to use a standard form or a standard location, which is 4.5 meters above the ground at the center of the place where a building would likely be located. Canadian Banknote's acoustic assessment, we're advised, already does this, and that's on the basis that 933 Gladstone already is zoned for a residential use. And in fact, as we've already heard, it is zoned for a residential use well in excess of 4.5 meters. Their current acoustic assessment is consistent with this interpretation. They've only had to do that 4.5 meters, kind of basically a holding, a placeholder until the actual proposal comes in for what's going to be constructed on that property. So obviously Canadian Banknote is getting different information from their consultants, and I would imagine their consultants in turn from the MECP. We've asked for Canadian Banknote to provide some clarity from the MECP about why they're getting a different interpretation. I haven't seen anything satisfactory yet from Canadian Banknote's consultants about why they have a different impression. We obviously want to take that into account, but MECP hasn't clarified that yet to us. And so we have to go by what's in the guideline, which says that they shouldn't be obligated to update until a new proposal comes in for site plan approval.
Okay, so the existing zoning at 933 Gladstone, right adjacent, is for multi-story. So in theory, they should have already been required to update their acoustic assessment for the MECP because of the future use there.
Madam Chair, that's correct. My understanding, and staff, planning staff can clarify further, but it's already zoned for multi-story residential use based on the size of the lot. So I believe from what I'm advised from Canadian Banknotes consultants, it already does account for that in their acoustic assessment.
Okay, so Councillor Alain Miglis has got his hand up to comment, to jump in. Alain?
Thanks, Madam Chair. And my apologies for not appearing visually. My camera seems to not be working this morning. I just want to add a couple of things to what Mr. Schramm has indicated. In the current zoning bylaw, and by the way, I want to thank Mr. Tremblay, who spoke earlier about PPS compliance. I'm not going to belabor that. I agree with what he said, but in terms of the current zoning today is MC with an FSI of 1.5. That site is 28,000 square meters. The zoning says that you have no height limit within 30 meters of an R4 zone, which means that on 80% of that site today, if we do nothing, Ottawa Community Housing can build a 37-story building today. That's in the zoning. That's just fact. Now, one of the things that we have done, and I am sorry that our friends at Canadian Banknote said that we did not consider them as an important stakeholder. I do want to point out that we did consider them as an important stakeholder. I echo Councillor Leeper's comments that they are an important employer in the community and in the neighborhood, is that we did two things. In the secondary plan that's before you today, we have a policy that says, and that's policy 4.1.4.5, which says new residential development that is built close to established industrial operations are responsible for mitigating their proximity in a manner that has no effect or impact on the established operations' ability to continue operating, and any studies or mitigation measures shall be done at their own cost. Madam Chair, that's additional protection for CBN because you don't find that policy today either in the Preston Champaign secondary plan that we're repealing or in the parent official plan. And the second thing I'd like to say is that we are introducing building height limits that give security and certainty to the community as to the profile of buildings, but the MC zone today has no height limits. It has none past 30 meters of an R4 zone. So these are just some facts that I wanted to leave with committee. Thank you.
That's great that you pointed that out. And that was our conversation yesterday. That was my understanding too. I know that it's it just didn't seem logical that an existing business that had been there for X amount of time and had met all the hurdles, targets, rules, etc. All of a sudden an application comes along and now the business that was there has to do a whole bunch of things in order to comply for the new build. That did not make sense to me. Meaning we have that even out in the suburban communities where we have by subdivision written into the subdivisions that they have to have air conditions. They have to have when there's an issue of heavy traffic or a large business. And so I'm glad that you put that out there. Where am I now? Are you finished now, Vice Chair Gower?
Well, I have one other question about one of the statements from the consultants, and it was they said the city's responsibility. It's the city's responsibility to mitigate the costs of change for Canadian banknote, and there's a requirement to have an agreement in place to mitigate those costs before zoning is approved. Can staff comment on that? I'm not clear who would compel that agreement or what the actual requirement is there.
So again, Madam Chair, the introduction of the policy in the secondary plan is a way for the city to signal and actually to signal internally as well to our colleagues in development review that this is a requirement and it has to be imposed on parties that are developing buildings. By changing the zoning, the city is not developing a building. The city is not the proponent. The city is putting in place the zoning that creates the ability for any landowner to apply to the city to construct a building. Until we are in receipt of an application and we know what that building contains, it may contain residential, it may not. It may contain offices, it may contain a hotel. The city is not in a position to apply the right requirements, but we do have a policy now in the secondary plan, which we don't have today, to add that additional layer of scrutiny to anything that comes into the city so that the checks and balances are front and center.
Okay, thank you, Elaine, for clarifying. I see other committee members with hands up, so I'll let them continue with questions.
Yeah, Councillor Leeper, then Councillor Kluche.
Thank you, Chair. And first off, thank you very much to the team. I can't remember. I think my first open house on this was in 2013. This has been a very long conversation with the community, but a very productive one. I think it's noteworthy that this morning the community associations are not here opposing this. The community associations are supportive, and it's more than just an affordable housing development at Gladstone Village. This secondary plan is going to allow for the development of tall, dense buildings on the Hintonburg side along the spine of the O train. But I think, folks recognize the importance of supporting that transit and of keeping that keeping that tall development, where the transit actually is. I do have one question though for you, and this is something that we've already gone back and forth on, Tavi, but I just wanted to get a commitment on the record today. The Hintonburg Community Association has noticed a difference in treatment of heritage properties, where some are mentioned as being on the registry and others are not. The Standard Bread building, the Standard Bread Factory, is a very important heritage building to the community. The secondary plan does not highlight its heritage status. Can I just ask for your commitment that before this goes to council, we will add some language in the secondary plan that highlights the heritage importance and status of the Standard Bread building?
Yes, thank you, through you, Madam Chair. That would be no problem. The buildings that are heritage designated currently in the studying area, they weren't included in the secondary plan because that has been established. They are registered under Part 4 of the Planning Act. So all of the appropriate regulations and process will apply to them. The ones that were mentioned were ones that are on the heritage registry list. So that's sort of still a work in progress. So that's why we focused on that. That said, we understand that at 1010 Somerset, for example, there will be redevelopment that will be happening, and Plant Bath Recreation Center is one of the heritage registered properties. So we just want to make sure. I don't think it would hurt to add that language in there. I think actually an additional, a previous version of the secondary plan did have that. We thought it was redundant, we took it out, but it might not hurt to put it back in just to reassert that. And that applies to the Standard Bread building as well, given that there's an application ongoing there.
Our friend Linda Hode at the Hintonburg Community Association would very much appreciate just that additional reinforcement of its status. But I am really pleased that the Hintonburg Community Association and Civic Hospital Neighborhood Association are very supportive of the direction in which the secondary plan has gone. Thank you very much for getting us to this point, and we'll look forward to seeing the rest of the properties develop.
Thank
Thanks,
you, Councillor Leeper. I have two more people with their hands up. If you wish to do wrap up, you can as well. And for Ms. McQuaig, who I see is putting up her hand from time to time, that's not the way it works here. Once the questions are done, have been asked of the delegation, that's it. However, I would say that if this item should pass today, it will be at council on March the 10th. So there's time for you to connect individually with councillors as well. So we have Councillor Cloutier, Councillor Fleury, Councillor Brockington. Councillor Cloutier, questions and or wrap up.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Merci beaucoup, Madame la Présidente. And I guess you just cut the legs out from under me, because I just want to ask, and perhaps through staff, the issues with respect to the Canadian banknote, is it noise only that we are dealing with? Is that the primary issue?
Okay, I'm gonna have Ms. McQuaig step in and answer that. It's just better for her to do that.
I appreciate that. I just
very briefly, please, Ms. McQuaig. I'm making an exception here.
Thank you.
Yes, it's simply noise compliance that we're dealing with.
Thank you so much. And so to staff, the policies, as we've learned, are articulated in the current OP, and some of it is the definition of the point of reception, both in a time and in a location. So on an unimproved property adjacent to the Canadian Banknote Company, the point of reception currently is 4.5 meters above the ground in the center of the unimproved land. Is that correct?
Through you, Madam Chair, correct. If that unimproved property, as is the case in 933 Gladstone, were zoned for residential use, even if it's a multi-story residential use, There's no other development proposal in on the site in terms of a site plan approval. It's 4.5 meters above the center point of that likely future development.
Thank you, Mr. Schrom. And are Canadian Banknote Company in compliance with that currently?
I'm advised through you, Madam Chair. I'm advised by Canadian Banknote that yes, they are currently in compliance, and I think they've reiterated that today, and that their compliance does include that assessment for 933 Gladstone.
Thank you very much. And Monsieur Miguelez said that, or a certain, maybe it wasn't Alain, but someone said that their staff's interpretation is that further compliance with another point of reception, which I'll get to in a moment, is not required until site plan approval, while Canadian Banknote are saying it is required at zoning approval. Is that, do I have
Madam
that?
Chair, that's correct. That's a correct summary.
Okay. And we also heard that point of reception might be at a window, at the face of a window, in a developed property. Is that the correct interpretation of a point of reception? And my follow-up question will be, at what height? Is it still 4.5 meters?
So, Madam Chair, that does depend on the specifics of the guideline. So the guideline sets out specific requirements as to where each point of reception is. I think it's a simplification, but yes, generally it's at the plane of the window at each level of the residential development that could be receiving noise.
Okay, so explain to me, please, how Monsieur Miguelez said that Monsieur Tremblay said, from FOTAN said that OCH would be amenable to improving the windows and ensuring that windows are more noise resistant. The correct term escapes me. And Alain Miguelez said that new residential plans are responsible for those mitigating so that they don't impact an industrial entity like Canadian Banknote. How do we reconcile at the face of a window versus the inside at the point of reception, and how an improved window that might be installed by Ottawa Community Housing would impact that measurement?
Madam Chair, I apologize if I've confused things a bit here, but my understanding, and this is getting a bit more into the technical aspects that are a little outside my legal expertise and more in the noise engineering side of things. The guideline does permit mitigation measures like improved windows and other measures to allow a noise emitter like Canadian Banknote to achieve compliance. So what we would do at the site plan stage is require a detailed noise study that would be done by OCH that would recommend any mitigation measures which would be required to ensure that the ministry requirements are met at the time. And those would be a condition of site plan approval.
So are you saying, Mr. Schrom, that the responsibility will fall onto OCH or the developer of that property at the property adjacent to Canadian Banknote to make sure that the developer of that residential property, are in compliance with respect to the building materials and how that would mitigate the noise?
Through you, Madam Chair, correct.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cloutier. Councillor Fleury, Brockington, Hubley.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. And I want to thank a number of folks here. I want to thank the Community Association. I want to thank Councillor McKenney. I want to thank the Ottawa Community Housing and tenants who've been engaged throughout the process. As Councillor Leeper said earlier, it's been a journey, and we OCHs and the city and Councillor McKenney met a number of times to make sure that all components were properly understood and presented. So I want to personally thank my colleague. I want to thank also Tavi and Alain, and specifically Cliff and Rob for their work. So this is very important for OCH. As you know, we are the city's builder of choice, and there's a number of projects here from Rochester Phase 2 to Gladstone Village that are all coming together with additional green space and schools. So really counting on the committee's support to help us advance OCH's new and increased units within that community.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Councillor Fleury. Councillor Brockington?
Thanks, Chair. I will be supporting this motion. I think that this is a very strong and sound development proposal, and appreciate all the work that's gone into it. I used to work when I was in university on Breeze Hill, which is basically a block to the west, and thought that this area, needed some additional development, and really happy to see the proposal. Back in 2001, when the Trillium line started, Gladstone and Walkley stations were dropped to save time and money. They were not seen as the most busy of stations. So it's really great to see a station coming here through the LRT Phase 2 and the development proposal that we see. So it's an excellent for this part of our town. Just one question, because I've been really following the concerns from the banknote, and I just want to get some clarity in my mind with respect to the site plan agreement. And at the time that the site plan agreement gets signed, the onus, this is a question for clarification, the onus is then on the banknote to make required changes then, is that correct?
Madam Chair, through you, if site plan, at site plan approval stage, OCH would have to complete a noise study, which would recommend mitigation measures to ensure that their use, the sensitive land use of residential use, isn't going to be receiving noise levels in excess of the ministry's requirements, which as I spoke about with Councillor Cloutier, is could include upgrading windows, that sort of thing. Canadian Banknote would then be able to go to the ministry and prove that they're not emitting noise. It's being received at a level in excess of the 45 decibels, which they indicated was their limit. So it would avoid the type of costly compliance exercise that Canadian Banknote is worried that they would have to conduct now before the site plan stage.
Why is that bundled with site plan and I have no doubt that this proposed development will happen, but sometimes zoning gets approved, site plan gets approved, and then a property sits for some time. Why put the onus on Banknote to do that work now and not when, let's say, building permits are issued?
Madam Chair, just as a point of clarification, I think the Banknote, our interpretation of the guideline is that Banknote won't be required to do the work now of upgrading their acoustic assessment, although Banknote's getting different advice from their consultants, but our interpretation is that they won't have to. It won't be until the site plan stage, which will be following this zoning approval at a later point. And then in terms of why not require it at the building permit stage, the guideline refers to either building permit or site plan approval as the trigger for when a new point of reception is created, and you have to do that update to your assessment. So in some cases, some buildings don't require site plan approval. When you submit your building plans for a building permit, you would also trigger that requirement. So it means that any new building, when it's getting to that stage, when you're at a design stage, either site plan approval or building permit, assessments need to be updated.
So how much more study and reports are required before you think the OCH is ready to finalize their site plan with the city?
I'm afraid I don't have the details of OCH's current application in progress. I might, Mr. Sitam might be able to speak to that better than I am.
That's probably more of a a amygdalus kind of a question, I would think.
It's not binding on my decision today, Madam Chair, so I'll just leave it for now. It's just more out of curiosity, but all this to say, to repeat what I said at the beginning, I think this is a very sound proposal for this part of town. I will be supporting it, recognizing there's still some work that needs to be done, but we really need to get going on this, and I'm happy to see all the work that's happened today. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Brockington. Last speaker is Councillor Hubley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just have one area I want to focus on. Where does this 45 dBs come from? Is that a provincial standard that for the building, or is that just something we did locally?
Madam Chair, through you, I'm advised that 45 decibels is the level that CBN has to achieve at points of reception. That would depend on the ministry and their guideline, and how CBN is classified in terms of a noise emitter. It's a more of a technical question than a legal question, but that is what CBN is advising currently that they have to comply with.
Well, I'd like to get some information where this is coming from, because my understanding is road noise can go up to 60 dBs. So why are we asking an employer in the area to meet a better standard than we as a city can meet? So who can answer that?
Well, if they can't answer it today, they can answer it before council.
I would be happy with that, Madam Chair. I just think we should be playing fair here with all the stakeholders.
Thank you. Did you happen to know it, Mr. Schramm?
Yeah, Madam Chair, I'm happy to try to get more information about exactly where the 45 comes from and how that compares to the city's road noise requirements.
Perfect.
Thank you.
So thank you, Councillor Hubley. Councillor McKinney for wrap up. Hang on before you start. I just thought of something. Councillor Leeper, you never put the what is it you have?
There should be one motion that I'm aware of with respect to the asset management's implications section.
Right, and then I see something to replace document 7.
I think, yeah, and then Catherine has a motion, I think, with respect to making Rochester.
I have a direction, yeah.
A direction, okay, so.
Okay, let's put those down right now before Councillor McKinney goes to wrap up, okay?
Sounds like a plan. And Melody, could I just ask you to, yeah, thanks, just make sure I'm working with the right version. Yeah,
just
so
tell us what it means rather than read it word for word. Since we're just
my understanding is that this deals with a concern that OCH had with respect to the underpass at City Center, and gives them some certainty that they need with respect to the language and what they might be required to do. So it's therefore be it resolved, the Planning Committee replace document 7 with the revised document 7. Sorry, Melody, could you just scroll up? This is a different one. Okay, sorry, I'm looking at a different motion. I'm happy to move this. Therefore, be it resolved, the Planning Committee replace document 7 with the revised document 7 attached as Appendix 1 to this motion, showing the modifications in red, and be it further resolved that pursuant to the Planning Act, subsection 3417, no further notice be given. But I might just ask staff to provide a quick note of color on that one.
Yes, I think that's important. So who's going to speak to this motion? Mr. McGillis, if you would.
I'd like to ask I'd like to ask Mr. Seatam actually to walk us through these.
Well, I don't want to take a walk through a park here. I just want to very succinctly tell us what it does.
The nature of the motions is really just clarity and some tweaking of language. It's something that OCH had requested. The city concurs. It doesn't actually, I wouldn't say it's substantive changes in any way. It's just clarity of language.
Can I just ask you also whether or not it would be, and I don't know what the direction is, Councillor McKinney, that you're moving, but you know, to address the concerns of OCH. We also heard very clearly the concerns of Canadian banknote today, and I'm wondering if direction should be tabled and sent to staff on that, just for clarification for their part. So Mr. Schramm, I'll ask you to think about that. And I'll go over to Councillor McKinney. If you wanted to introduce your direction,
I will, yeah.
Legitimately, Councillor
Yes.
Leeper will be directing, and then we'll go back to see what the answer is on the Canadian banknote direction.
Okay. So this is just in with respect to Rochester Street. I think you probably, well, you may not remember, but it's been a while, but in the Preston Carling realm secondary plan, Rochester Street was, there was language in there that committed it to becoming a complete street. So this is just that staff be directed to include the following text to describe the desired future streetscape typology for the portion of Rochester Street within the Corso Italia Station District secondary plan boundaries. And that is that Rochester Street will be designed as a complete street with wide sidewalks, bicycle facilities, on-street parking and street trees, taking into account the context of the corridor and the available right-of-way. So that's gone through transportation staff and they've agreed to that.
Okay. And so does anyone have an answer for me about a direction for Canadian banknote? Any thoughts at all? I think, you know, they're not trusting the site plan being the time to pull the trigger on this. So I would like to have some kind of a direction that Vice Chair Gower, if he's willing to, can give today. You know, even if it's tied into the site plan, I'd just like to have something. Do we need to get that from this? Yes, Alain?
Madam Chair, I'm hoping that what we might do is to provide a letter to Canadian banknote to outline the points that we've presented through Mr. Schramm, and as well confirm the existing zoning and reiterate the effect of the policy that we're introducing into the secondary plan that does provide the protection that I'm thinking they're looking for. And staff has no difficulty doing that.
I think that would be good. Vice Chair Gower, what do you think?
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, it's we can't tell the MECP how to interpret their own rules, but certainly at least providing our own interpretation and how we've attempted to address those issues within the documents that are in front of us. I think that's reasonable, and if we could direct staff as Alain has outlined and do that before this comes to council.
Chair, can I just ask something on that issue?
Hang on a second, because Mr. Mark is trying to jump in now because he's asking me if the McKinney direction that'll be directed through Councillor Leeper, if that is an amendment to the OPA, it should be a motion. So Mr. Mark.
So Mr. Chair, Madam Chair, I saw it come up on the screen and it was not clear to me, and perhaps Mr. Migueles and Mr. Sitam can enlighten the situation. The language that was suggested by Councillor McKinney in her direction, is that an amendment to the text of the OPA? Because if it is, then it should be a motion, Madam Chair.
And my understanding is that indeed it would be an amendment to the secondary plan, yes.
Then it should be a motion, please, Madam Chair.
Okay. No, I'm happy to switch that over to a motion.
Well, is Councillor Leeper happy to move it? Yes.
Yes.
Okay. All right. So, Councillor Leeper, we were in wrap up with Councillor McKinney. Did you want to? Do you have questions?
Just with respect to, I am assuming that staff have shared their interpretation of the CBN dispute with CBN.
Yes.
Yeah. So what are we accomplishing with the direction? My understanding is we're now at an impasse. CBN is asking for one of two things. The first is to defer passage of the OPA. Because it's going to impose costs on them if it is passed as is. And then the second thing that they're asking for is that we assure them of compensation for any modifications to their facility that they need to do as a result of the new zoning that's in place. Our staff disagree with the interpretation that CBN has made. I'm just trying to understand what further work needs to be done here. We're at an impasse. We've shared our interpretation with CBN. You know, I think councillors will vote now with their eyes wide open as to the nature of that dispute and impasse.
Yeah, I think that was clarified, I think by Mr. Miglis. I just was looking for something that was on the table that was part of some kind of a formality, because I think that it was confirmed to us that the cost would not be borne by Canadian banknote, and in fact would be borne by the measures that would need to be taken to mitigate any noise from them on the new build. And it's the new build that would have to assume the cost of extra insulation, windows, et cetera, that goes on. That's what I heard. And which one person, okay, is going to confirm either what Councillor Leeper's saying or myself?
Madam Chair, I'm happy to respond, and it is correct that staff has outlined our position to Canadian banknote in the past, and your summary of what staff has said, I think I agree with that. Canadian banknote should be held, can rely on city's site plan approval process to ensure that they're not responsible for mitigation measures of a new build being put in.
Is that a commitment that you're willing to put into writing for them?
Staff can undertake to write a letter if directed by planning committee to outline this all in one place.
So that is the appropriate direction to take coming out of this, is to make that commitment.
And Mr. Miglis said that he would do that.
Yes, Madam Chair.
Perfect. Thank you. Now back to are we where we need to be? Ms. Duffany, we have put on the table the document now.
So we have the document 7 motion on the table, and now the Rochester motion.
Yeah, turned motion. Yeah.
Yep. And so we still have the asset management motion, which I'll bring up.
And this is the one that Councillor Leeper, you started to speak to, but then we switched over to document 7.
Yeah, I mean, it's the same discussion. My understanding is OCHs are looking for some certainty around a multi-use path. And this motion is therefore be it resolved that the text in the asset management implication section be replaced from policy section 525 to 5216 proposes the city center underpass pathway, a primary active transportation route for the secondary plan study area. If limited vehicular access is to be permitted using the city center underpass pathway, it must be subordinate to pedestrian and cycling circulation. This would require the width of the underpass to be enlarged and would require modification of the existing bridge structure. That's been proposed to be changed to, there is major water and sewer infrastructure that encumbers the largely vacant lands controlled by the city and lands expected to be conveyed to the city from the federal government in 2021. Area east of railway cut, north of Gladstone, west of existing development from Plant Bass south to Balsam. A coordinated plan will be required to relocate this infrastructure and or to ensure that development avoids the alignment of this infrastructure. A financial plan will also be required to support the funding of infrastructure relocation. This plan may also need to address advancement of renewal of some infrastructure in this area. While plans specific to infrastructure relocations and servicing for this area are not within the scope of the infrastructure master plan to be updated in 2022. The strategies for servicing increased levels of intensification as would be permitted by the proposed official plan and zoning bylaw amendments will be addressed as part of this update. While capacity exists to accommodate further intensification in existing urban development areas of the city, there are limits to available capacity, and the focus program will be required to manage the impacts of intensification on existing infrastructure. In particular, increased on-site stormwater management requirements may need to be imposed in order to manage these impacts, which could have implications on the design of residential intensification projects. Be it resolved that no further notice be given pursuant to section 3417 of the Planning Act.
Thank you. All right, Councillor McKenney, then we'll go back to those motions, and we'll do it in the order that they, starting with the last one. Councillor McKenney for wrap up.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I just want to, again, I just want to clarify that what the language in the secondary plan here with respect to 975 Gladstone, where it says new development that is adjacent to this block shall ensure appropriate mitigation measures are implemented. Is this, I'm just, concerned if we're passing on something to Ottawa Community Housing, a significant cost out of community housing that perhaps they shouldn't be responsible for either. So my question is kind of twofold. Is this new language in the secondary plan that does that because they're beside an industrial use? And also in terms of the noise mitigation, how different would that be from, say, the train in terms of decibels? I mean, we talked about, was Councillor Hubley brought up traffic, but these two sites, Loretta and 933 Gladstone, are also beside the Trillium line.
Madam Chair, if nothing happened today and we continued with existing zoning, Ottawa Community Housing would submit a development application under the MC zone, and they would be subject to studies. They would be subject to the studies that kick in because of the closeness of the Canadian banknote, and they would do the regular noise and vibration studies with respect to their proximity to the old train line. What we've done is that we've introduced a policy in the secondary plan to make it clear that these studies have to be done, and those are specifically there in response to concerns that were raised to us by the Canadian Banknote Company to make sure that nobody forgets. This would be done as a matter of development review if nothing happened today.
Yeah. But when development does happen, are we passing along a cost to our community housing provider?
Yeah, to whomever.
In this case, yes,
in this case,
yes.
Yeah.
So because of the nature of this location and how close and adjacent it is to sources of noise, be it Ottawa Community Housing or whoever it is that owns that land and develops is responsible for mitigating the impacts of the noise that exists. It's the principle of agent of change. The Canadian banknote was there. It's there already. If somebody is new, they're responsible to make sure that whoever's going to occupy their building will not suffer the impact of the noise that's already there and is allowed to continue.
Okay, thanks for that clarification. And just on Mr. Zuila's concerns earlier this morning, the two questions then for staff are what is being done to mitigate the impact of that 26-story tower on residents that are directly across the street from that block on Raymond, or that part of that block on Raymond?
Yes, through you, Madam Chair. Actually, I just want to reassure Dr. Subria that planning actually did make changes as a result of his input. So he has been heard. He is being heard. I guess there's a few things that happened. First of all, at the previous open house, the site of concern was actually proposed at 30 stories, and the other tower on Rochester and Raymond was proposed as 26. That has been flipped in response to the comment. We also wrote into policy that and zoning that the new development at the southeast corner of Booth and Raymond would incorporate a podium along Booth Street with a maximum height of 4 stories to maintain that sort of low-rise building profile that's directly across the street. And we further went into zoning and added that there would be an additional setback of 5 meters of the tower from the podium. And this would not normally be done. This isn't being done anywhere else in the study area. So we're really, we shifted the policy. We're sculpting the zoning to try to mitigate that, knowing that this is also along Raymond Street, a busy street, near the transit way, the Queensway. And it is probably the most appropriate site for further density.
Thank you. I do appreciate that. And yeah, Raymond, is up against the Queensway. It's, meters from Gladstone Station. And this is going to be a part of a greater development that is going to provide, the right type of regeneration in this community and affordability. So I do want to start by thanking staff. This has been a long time coming. It actually started in 2001 when we agreed to build the O-train. And we knew from then on that we would have to put people along that train, that rail line. So, to Tavi and Alain, who I've worked with since 2014 on this. I think I met Leaper at one of those open houses before we were elected, actually in 2013. So it's been a long time coming. Thank you to OCH as well. We wouldn't be here today had OCH not made that bold move to purchase the property that it did at 933 Gladstone. It was the right thing to do. It was very progressive, forward-thinking of Ottawa community housing to look at a community that really had so much unused space and needed such this type of development. DCA, HCA, our community associations, Bliss, the residents that came out time and time again since 2013 get us to where we are today, and to you, Chair, and Planning Committee. This is going to change the downtown. This is very exciting for our communities. I remember back when staff came to me and said, you know what, we want to put this on hold. 2015, we were ready to come to planning. And, all I could tell the community was, look, it'll come back the same or better. And it's come back better. OCH made the purchase that they did. It's going to be a mixed income, mixed use community on a transit station. And people will be able to live together. Rochester Heights, the way it was developed at one time, nobody went there. I never went there because there was no need to go. There were no stores. There was no library. There was no community space. There was no public park. So you just didn't go. So people are excluded from daily life if they live in a neighborhood and they're raising their kids in a neighborhood where we don't integrate. We will integrate in this neighborhood. We will live together in this neighborhood, and kids who grow up together, take the train together, go to school together, play in the park together, go to the store together. That will build equity into a neighborhood, because those kids, when they hit 16, 17, they want a job. If they go to their local pool or their local store, they're on more of an equal footing. So it's the right thing to do. It gives us an opportunity to expand our recreation space in the downtown. And it's an opportunity to build an arts hub in a part of the city that's connected now, or will be connected to almost every other part of the city. you know, through transit. We'll be able to go from there to Canada, to Orleans, south to Barrhaven. You know, we'll just be able to move around. So we'll be connected. It's and to have an arts hub where you know you're at that juncture is really very exciting. The notion that we're going to get a real park, a continuous park, 1010, and that's coming to that land purchase is coming to Fedco next week. Again, is significant in terms of its impact on the downtown and on the green space available for us and for everyone in the downtown. So this is, you know, and a school, a possible school. It's just we are, you know, we've taken almost 15 acres of land, and we are going to be moving forward. It really should be a lesson on how to move forward on development for LeBreton Flats, which is just down the street and has stalled time and time again. This is the type of community that we need to be building everywhere in the city. And with your approval today, this will kick it off. So thank you to committee for considering this, for the questions. I look forward to seeing this through, and also my colleague, Councillor Leeper, who actually straddles both of the wards, and also Councillor Fleury, Chair of OCH, for moving this along and getting us to where we are today. And again, back to kudos to staff. It does speak volumes that we're here today and without much consternation around what is a significant change in the pattern in which this property and this whole neighborhood will develop over the next few years. So thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so the direction that we talked about with regard to Canadian banknote, that staff be directed to provide a letter to Canadian banknote with staff's interpretation of when the environmental compliance needs to occur, and that the secondary plan 4.1.4.5 clearly states that new residential developments need to do the studies and implement mitigation to ensure that Canadian banknote continues to operate.
Chair, can I suggest we just take off the last section of that phrase?
Yes.
And put a period after the word mitigation?
Me too. Implement mitigation. Okay, so that's the direction. Do we have to carry the direction? No.
Unless somebody disagrees and wants
All
to
right.
put it to a.
So the next step we start with, I think we've now got 3 motions. Is that right, Ms. Stephanie?
We have the Rochester motion, the asset management, and the document 7.
Right. So on the Rochester motion, is that carried?
Carried.
Carried.
On the asset management motion, is that carried?
Carried.
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 And on the document 7, is that carried?
Carried.
Carried.
And so then on this very important official plan amendment for Corso Italia Station District Secondary Plan, etc., as amended, is that carried?
Carried.
Carried.
Perfect. Thanks very much, and thank you. Thank you to everyone who came out today, but thank you to everyone who's participated over many, many years. I know that staff are particularly proud of the work that they've done, and so are we. Thanks very much. So I think we are at the end of the agenda for today. I will remind you of the great news that the March 11th meeting is no longer on the books. And so our next meeting won't be till the 25th. Are there any notices of motion? How about inquiries? No other business. So we're adjourned until the 25th of March. Thanks very much, everyone. Thanks, Melody, and thanks to all the staff. that were present and helpful today.
Thanks all.
Have a good day.
Bye-bye.